there is a self-delusion going on here that the top 10% of the people play the stock market. They own the most of the shares. They are the CEOs. They're related to them and all of that. And for them, they hold on to a lot of their wealth. It's it's the other 90%. And that's why you get more and more of that old notion of a split economy, that 10% of us live in a world of fancy restaurants and plenty of food and all the rest. And the rest of us are the ones that are traumatized every time we go to the grocery store by what we can no longer afford. Uh, Here's a statistic to think about. Compared to the year 2020, so 5 years ago, the price of beef in the United States has risen by more than 50%. Hamburgers are like a basic part of an American diet, at least for those people who can afford meat. Think about what it means that the cost of the hamburger has gone up 50%, more or less, uh, since the year 2000. You're seeing a division which explains our politics, but it's a division that I don't think is sustainable, neither by the ideology here, which keeps promising that this situation will continue, even though the foundation of it, as we're trying to show, is harder and harder. And I see some of these policies as kind of wild Trump type, if I can use the football metaphor of the Hail Mary pass. You're going to attack Iran. Maybe you can win. Maybe Iran disappears. Maybe the West can snatch all of the oil in Iran, blah, blah, until the Russians point out, we have a deal with the Iranians. If you really come here, we're going to have to fight with you. And one thing we can assure you, you'll never get that oil. What do we do? Well, we go and fight against Mr. Maduro, who can't defend himself, at least not in the conventional sense. And we keep we become judge, jury, and executioner of the hapless Venezuelans who are taking a boat ride 1,000 miles from the United States and get incinerated, with the whole thing being handled by the president with no evidence at all that these people were doing something illegal, for which even the punishment isn't execution, and yet they were executed for the crime for which that's not the punishment that's legally. Okay, these are fairly desperate acts, and hoping that the Israelis will somehow be able to pull the rabbit out of the hat of the Middle East and become an acceptable dominant power. Really, you have got to believe in lots of magic to line up your policies in that way. I mean, the statistic came out this week that the top 10, if I have it right, the top 10% of the income distribution accounts for 50% of the consumer demand in our society. All right, that's another way of saying that the bottom 90% are piss poor. They can't afford anything, right? Well, given that we depend on imports, that's not a good basis for the future. We're not going to be able to run the kind of deficits that we used to. That's my guess at this point. All right, what then is going to sustain the story Michael told? How are we going to pay for all of those bases? We don't have the exports to do it, and we're not running the kinds of deficits, nor is the rest of the world eager to accumulate dollars in the way that they were before. And that was true before BRICS became important. The decline of the dollar as a reserve currency is at least 30 years old. The Chinese once had 1.2 trillion. They have 750 billion. I know these are big numbers, but that's a big decline. It's not surprising, but it's a big decline. And so for me, I'm beginning to wonder, how long can you keep this up? And when you add the degree to which military payments in this country are a Keynesian support of aggregate demand in our society, then you see he can't afford a military, but he can't afford not to have the military. And I suspect that's the reason why Mr. Trump, who comes into office promising to stop the endless wars, has neither stopped them nor has he been able to avoid proliferating more war. He attacked Iran, and he's busily now provoking Venezuela and taking extraordinary steps to do it. And giving carte blanche to Mr. Netanyahu is extraordinary. You know, we wonder, why would a government do these extraordinary things? And in a way, Michael's story gives the beginning of an answer, that there's more going on here than macro management. That's important. And there's more going on than balance of payments. That's important. There's also managing the military, the budget, and the activity when you're so badly out of whack. You can't beat the Russians in Ukraine. That's what's obvious. It's obvious to the whole world. They can't let go. What's the matter here? Even in Vietnam, they understood we've been defeated, and the Americans withdrew, and the Communist Party of Vietnam took over and has remained the government ever since. That's 35 years ago, right? Or what is it now? Maybe more than that, 50 years ago. Then they were defeated in Afghanistan and they withdrew. Mr. Biden, in the end, did what the previous presidents couldn't dare do, which is to say, this is hopeless. And so they're losing. Harper's Magazine just came out this last week, and on the front page is the lead story of the magazine, which, here's the title: Why do the American military keep losing all the wars? Wow, you're now even able to ask in a public way the forbidden question. And if the rest of the world is worried about the United States economically, we have to remember it was also worried about it militarily, and that danger is receding as we see what's going on in the world. The desperation inside the United States, the fascistic turn that we are assaulted with every day, is a reflection of all of these dead ends confronting the people who run this system. It now becomes clear with each passing day what the purpose, and Michael has given us the context, what the purpose is, on the one hand, of raising tariffs, and on the other hand, of using them as bargaining chips to get other countries to agree to invest money in the United States. For example, in the last 2 or 3 days, there have been a flurry of statements coming out of England because Trump is visiting Britain, and big boasting of huge amounts of money, hundreds of billions of dollars, that the British are going to invest in the United States and vice versa. Okay, very interesting story. But let's take a look at what the reality is. Number one, the purpose of the tariffs was to do something that now the country is desperate to do. I want to underscore this because I don't think it's very well understood. We are watching a Republican president leading a Republican Party that for 100 years has been the carrier of the notion that taxing is bad and the government shouldn't tax anybody, that we are in favor of private enterprise, not state enterprise, and the government should not blah, 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 blah. And what is he doing? Imposing an enormous tax on the American economy. That's what tariffs are. They are a tax. So we should wonder what would make ideologically driven conservative business people who hate to pay taxes, who have been supporting the government, the Republican Party, for a century to keep their taxes down and have had that work well for them. Why would they suddenly reverse everything and impose enormous tax? Answer: they're desperate. They have no other way to go. Their borrowing is out of control. Let's remember, in 1970, the total debts of the United States were a few $100 billion. Today, it's $37 trillion. That's an increase that dwarfs production, prices, anything. Nothing goes like that. We are borrowed crazy. Why? Because we had already reached difficulties that meant the government, to finance itself, couldn't tax the rich who controlled politics and wouldn't permit it, and had pushed the tax burden onto the mass of people so much that by the 60s and 70s, we had tax revolts. That's what they were called. California, all over the United States. And then began the solution. When the politicians cannot dare tax their donors and can no longer tax the people, what do? They borrow as if it were a magic alternative. And who do they borrow from? The corporations and the rich, who lend to the government the money they did not have to pay in taxes. This is Schweinerei, the Germans would say. This is pure fakery. But now we get to where we are today. We've borrowed so much playing this absurd game. We got the rest of the world to get in on this, holding their wealth in the form of U.S. treasuries and so on, that we have gotten to the point, which was already reached under the short tenure of Elizabeth Truss in England, where the capital markets say, we're not lending to you anymore. You're not a reliable borrower. You have gone so far in your borrowing that we can see you're getting close to that political point where your own people will not allow their taxes to be used to pay interest on a debt rather than to feed their children. And in that game, it's the creditor who loses. So we don't want to lose. All right, so what is the U.S. going to do? Tariff. It will, in fact, put a tax. It'll put it on businesses because most of the tariffs are paid by businesses that import into the United States. And they will say to those businesses, it's your job, you have to pay this, it's your job to figure out whether you can squeeze the foreigners to lower their price to offset the tariff, or you squeeze the American consumer via inflation and solve the problem that way. But we, the government, are no longer squeezing the masses. You, irony, you, the business community, are doing it through the inflation. That's the effort. Now you understand why Mr. Trump is eager to do the tariffs, but because they are resisted and because they are not generating anywhere near enough money to deal with this problem, he has the second half of it. He'll bargain away the tariff that wasn't doing the job anyway if you promise to move capital into the United States. Hence, Michael is quite right. It's a protection racket. You have to help us because we are a flailing, declining empire. And the only way we can continue to protect you, that's what they say to the Europeans, you've got to help us. You've got to give us all this money. Keir Starmer yesterday, in a spectacle as pathetic as any I've ever seen, boasts that the United States has committed to investing 150 or maybe even 250, it's a little fuzzy, the numbers, of money over the next 10 years in Britain. And he says with real pride, it's going to produce, we hope, 7,900 jobs. So I looked at the statistics. What's the job story in England between August of 2024 and August of this year? They lost 127,000 jobs. He's boasting of something that can't offset even 10% of the decline of the British Empire, and it's coming over 10 years. That's an admission of failure that's been dressed up as an achievement. Last point. If the rest of the world, to quote Michael, is being charged an entrance fee to sell their stuff in the United States, and that's what a tariff is. You got to pay this if you're going to sell stuff in the United States, right? That's hurting the exporters around the world because their market is going to shrink. That's elementary. They're screaming bloody murder to their governments, who are therefore desperate to give them something to support this craziness that's hurting them. And what do they give them? They give them these announcements. The United States will invest if we invest in the United States. And that's the bigger story. Suppose that works. Suppose that these leaders in Europe and beyond do in fact deliver hundreds of billions of dollars of capital investment in the United States. Frankly, I don't see it. I see the United States becoming less attractive as a place to make investments with each day. But let's assume I'm wrong, the money comes. Then in those countries, the austerity already being imposed on the people in every one of the European countries. Now, only the rate of doing that is different, not the phenomenon. In that country, it will be possible for the radical left opposition, and for that matter, perhaps also the right opposition, to say what we would say here. We have leaders who have arranged that the money that might have been invested to create jobs in our country has instead been shipped over to that other country. And why? Because it has been smacking us with tariffs. This is impossible. You will not survive politically when that is the program that you are effectively running.